The raw, vibrant pulse of New Orleans' French Quarter rarely penetrated the quiet solitude Elias Thorne sought. He was a shadow among the revelers, a silhouette hunched over a battered, slightly out-of-tune electronic keyboard. The humid air, thick with the scent of beignets and stale beer, usually carried the raucous joy of brass bands. But Elias, cloaked in a wide-brimmed fedora that obscured most of his face, often played a different tune, a melancholic jazz standard, or sometimes a haunting, complex melody born from the depths of his own unspoken pain. Once, his name had been synonymous with genius. Elias Thorne, the maestro, a multi-Grammy-winning jazz pianist and composer whose improvisations could weave magic and whose compositions had moved millions. But that life, that recognition, had vanished years ago, extinguished by a personal tragedy and a devastating hand injury that left him questioning not just his ability, but his very identity. Anonymity had become his chosen cloak, the bustling, indifferent streets his sanctuary. His existence was a series of meticulously observed rituals. Each morning, he'd emerge from the cramped, single room he rented in a forgotten corner of the city, the worn keyboard case clutched in his hand. He treated the instrument with a reverence usually reserved for sacred relics, wiping down its faded keys with a soft cloth, tuning it by ear with an almost obsessive precision. The worn, chipped paint on its casing told a story of countless hours, countless streets. He shied away from eye contact, his gaze fixed on the worn keys, his fingers dancing over them, weaving a tapestry of sound that few truly noticed. The hurried crowds, a river of tourists and locals, flowed past him like water around a stone, tossing a few coins into his open case, their hurried steps a rhythm to his quiet despair. He'd play familiar melodies, easy listening for the passing crowds, but sometimes when he thought no one was truly listening, he'd let snippets of his own intricate compositions, remnants of his past brilliance, escape, a private whisper to the ghosts of his former life. Despite his own meager earnings, Elias harbored a quiet, unwavering generosity. A few blocks down, a young, aspiring singer named Chloe often busked with a surprisingly powerful, soulful voice, her guitar case open for tips. She was raw, talented, and desperately poor. Each evening, after counting his own meager collection, Elias would quietly slip a significant portion of his daily tips, sometimes a quarter of what he'd earned, into Chloe's collection jar, an anonymous benefactor driven purely by empathy and a deep-seated desire to nurture young talent. He'd never speak to her, never let her know, simply walk by, a shadow in the twilight, leaving behind the quiet clink of coins. It was his small, defiant act of preserving art, a way of giving back to the music that had once defined him, even if he no longer allowed it to define him publicly. His left hand, the one unmarred by injury, still moved with the fluid grace of a true master. But his right, the source of his profound artistry, was a constant, subtle tormentor. As he played, he would occasionally wince or subtly massage his right hand, a phantom ache from the accident that had shattered both his bones and his career. It was a scar, invisible to most, but a searing reality for him. He avoided newsstands that displayed music magazines, deliberately veering away from any connection to the concert posters that advertised the latest jazz prodigies or classical virtuosos. The very thought of his former life, the accolades, the spotlights, now felt like a suffocating burden, a memory too painful to revisit. Hidden deep within his worn satchel, wrapped in a faded velvet cloth, was a small, tarnished replica of a Grammy Award. A secret he guarded fiercely, a symbol of a past he desperately tried to outrun. It was a constant reminder of who he once was and the life he had lost. The rising crescendo of oblivion. The tranquil, almost meditative existence Elias had carved out for himself on the bustling streets of New Orleans was suddenly threatened by the very forces that shaped the city's public face. A new urban revitalization initiative, swept through the mayor's office, championed by ambitious politicians and influential cultural figures. Its primary target, the city's vibrant but often unregulated street performance scene. Elias's favorite busking spot, a quiet, acoustically perfect alley nestled between two historic buildings, a place where his melodies could truly resonate, was now explicitly labeled a nuisance by the city's new cultural directorate. The plan, announced with fanfare, was to cleanse public spaces, to elevate the city's image, and to silence the very voices that gave it soul. The alley was threatened with permanent closure, set to be repurposed into an exclusive high-end art installation. The prospect of losing his spot was more than just a threat to his meager income. It was a profound invasion of his last sanctuary. This small, anonymous patch of pavement was where he connected with his music, where the raw, unpolished energy of the city fueled his improvisations. It was his only tether to the world he had abandoned. The threat of its closure, of being utterly cut off from even this clandestine form of artistry, awakened a flicker of the passion he thought long dead, igniting a quiet, simmering fury at the disdain shown towards street art, towards his very way of life. The face of this new, refined cultural image was Julian Vance, a young, arrogant, and undeniably celebrated classical pianist. Julian was a rising star in the global classical music scene, known for his prodigious technical brilliance, his flawless execution of complex concertos. Yet beneath the dazzling virtuosity lay a profound lack of emotional depth, a cold precision that prioritized perfection over passion. He was the freshly appointed artistic director of the Grandeur, the city's newly opened, opulent performing arts center, a monolithic structure of glass and steel designed to draw in elite audiences and overshadow the city's more organic, grassroots art scene. Julian was a vocal, almost vicious critic of street music, viewing it as unrefined, chaotic, and beneath what he considered true artistry. He was driven by a colossal ego and a desire to solidify his elitist vision of classical music as the only legitimate form of art. He had no personal connection to Elias, but saw him and all other street performers as obstacles, as crude stains on the polished facade he was trying to create for New Orleans. Julian's disdain wasn't confined to private conversations. He gave a highly publicized interview to the New Orleans Arts Review, his words dripping with contempt. "Street musicians," he declared, his perfectly sculpted features contorted in a sneer, "are nothing more than untalented beggars who degrade true artistry. Their cacophony pollutes the soundscape of this beautiful city. True talent belongs on grand stages, in hallowed halls, where it can be appreciated by a discerning audience, not on grimy streets, begging for spare change." He championed a new city ordinance that would ban all street performances, effectively eradicating what he considered a blight. Elias, hunched over a discarded newspaper, reading Julian's scathing words, felt the sting of humiliation, a familiar ache deep in his chest. The city council, swayed by Julian's charismatic rhetoric and, more significantly, by the immense financial backing of the Grandeur and its wealthy benefactors, began to lean heavily towards the ban. The initial debates were stacked against the street performers, their passionate but unorganized pleas easily dismissed by the council's polished arguments about public order and cultural elevation. Then Julian announced a citywide cultural showcase competition sponsored by the Grandeur. The winner would perform at the grand opening gala, a highly coveted opportunity. Ostensibly, it was to promote refined local talent, but in reality, it was subtly designed to further legitimize his crackdown on street musicians by contrasting their perceived crudeness with the polished brilliance of classical performance. He intended to make an example, to prove his point. Elias, witnessing the encroaching arrogance and the systematic threat to his last refuge, felt a dormant defiance stir within him. It wasn't just about his own anonymity anymore. It was about the dignity of street art, the raw, unbridled creativity that truly defined New Orleans, far more than any gleaming new concert hall ever could. He thought of Chloe, the young singer whose dreams he secretly supported, and countless others whose livelihoods and passions would be crushed by this ordinance. A quiet fury, long suppressed, began to burn. He knew the risks. To reveal himself, even subtly, would mean shattering the protective anonymity he had meticulously built. It would mean confronting the ghosts of his past, the pain of his injury, the raw wound of his family's loss. But the thought of his music, of all music that sprang from the soul of the streets, being deemed nuisance, of being silenced by such arrogant disdain, was unbearable. He resolved to fight, however quietly, however subtly, for the dignity of street art, for the very essence of the city's soul, even if it meant risking everything he had left. He had to make a stand. The point of no return had been reached. Discordant notes and a hidden chord. The afternoon sun cast long, shimmering shadows across Jackson Square, where the air usually vibrated with a medley of jazz horns and street artists' charcoal strokes. Today, however, a different kind of performance was unfolding. Julian Vance, impeccably dressed in a tailored linen suit, moved through the square like a king surveying his domain. He was on a publicity stroll with a small entourage, including a photographer and a PR assistant, all meticulously capturing his every candid interaction. His purpose was to demonstrate his commitment to elevating New Orleans' cultural scene, a thinly veiled campaign against the very street musicians who embodied its soul. Elias Thorne, his wide-brimmed hat pulled low, sat at his usual spot, his worn keyboard resting on an equally battered stand. He was playing a melancholic rendition of "Summertime," his fingers, despite the persistent tremor in his right hand, weaving a quiet, soulful tapestry of sound. A small crowd had gathered, a handful of tourists and a few locals, drawn by the unexpected depth of his improvisation. Most passers-by, however, simply tossed a few coins into his open case, barely registering his presence. Julian Vance's entourage approached, their laughter and self-important chatter cutting through Elias's music like a discordant note. Julian paused directly in front of Elias, his perfectly sculpted features twisted into a sneer. He gestured dismissively at the old keyboard. "Well, well, what have we here?" Julian's voice, amplified by his inherent arrogance, was loud enough to draw the attention of the small crowd. "Another one of New Orleans' cultural gems, I presume?" He chuckled, a cold, humorless sound. "Playing on that relic, are we? One would think, given the ample opportunities for real musical education, that one might have graduated beyond rudimentary street performances." Elias flinched, but kept playing, his gaze fixed on the keys. The words, though delivered by a stranger, felt like a direct assault on his very being, on the hidden passion he still harbored. "Don't you ever wonder," Julian continued, raising his voice for the benefit of his audience and the hovering camera, "why, if you possess such talent, you're not on a stage? Why you're polluting the soundscape with this noise? Why haven't you made something of yourself?" He waved a hand dismissively towards the few coins in Elias's case. "This is not artistry, my friend. This is begging. True talent belongs in concert halls, where it can be appreciated, not on grimy streets." The crowd murmured uncomfortably. Some shifted their weight, embarrassed by Julian's overt cruelty. Elias felt a searing heat rise in his chest, a profound anger at the arrogant contempt. The memory of his past glory, the countless hours of dedication, the devastating loss that had driven him to this anonymity, all of it boiled to the surface. He felt the tremor in his right hand, usually a source of quiet humiliation, now transforming into a tremor of indignation, a pulsating energy beneath his skin. Then something shifted. Elias's fingers, almost against his will, seemed to take on a life of their own. The melancholic "Summertime" melted away, dissolving into a torrent of breathtaking, complex improvisations. He didn't just play. He composed on the fly, weaving intricate jazz harmonies with dazzling, almost impossible runs. The melodies were startlingly sophisticated, rich with unexpected chord progressions and a raw, emotional depth that transcended mere technicality. For a fleeting, miraculous moment, the tremor in his hand seemed to vanish completely, lost in the furious, passionate flow of music. It was a furious, defiant explosion of suppressed genius, a raw, undeniable statement of his identity. He played a snippet of his own legendary composition, Whispers of the Delta, a piece so complex and iconic that it was immediately recognizable to any true jazz aficionado. Julian Vance, initially scoffing and preparing another derisive remark, found himself involuntarily frozen. His classically trained ear, honed to detect every nuance of musicality, recognized the profound genius emanating from the old keyboard. The sheer virtuosity, the startling originality, the unmistakable signature of a true master. It was overwhelming. A flicker of recognition, a vague, unsettling memory of a legendary style, crossed his face, quickly replaced by confusion, then a dawning, horrifying understanding, and finally, a surge of profound anger. This was not some random street musician. This was impossible. That's just a fluke, Julian stammered, trying to regain his composure, his voice a little strained. He forced a dismissive laugh. Mere mimicry. A clever trick. True talent belongs on grand stages, not grimy streets, performed by people like that. He gestured wildly at Elias, his face flushing with a mixture of fear and rage. He turned to his entourage, his usual smooth veneer cracking. Come on, let's go. There's nothing to see here. Just more noise. He dismissed the growing crowd, feeling threatened by their impressed murmurs, their rapt expressions. He had meant to humiliate Elias, but the music had, in fact, silenced him. Unbeknownst to Julian, a young woman named Maya Sharma stood on the periphery of the crowd, her phone discreetly recording. Maya was a struggling music journalist, her idealism often clashing with the cynical realities of the industry. She had grown increasingly disillusioned with the elitist classical scene, sensing a rigid adherence to tradition that stifled true artistry. She had been drawn to Elias's music earlier, sensing an unspoken depth. But his sudden, profound musical shift, the explosion of genius, had utterly captivated her. She zoomed in on Elias's hands, then on Julian's horrified face. A powerful journalistic instinct stirred within her. This wasn't just a street performance. This was a story, a hidden truth about the silent, dignified man behind the worn keyboard. She sensed a profound injustice, a hidden legend. As Julian hastily retreated, Maya lingered, her mind racing. She watched Elias pack up his keyboard, his shoulders slightly less hunched, a faint, almost imperceptible air of defiance clinging to him. She approached him tentatively, her voice soft. Excuse me, sir. That was extraordinary. I'm Maya Sharma, a journalist. May I ask you a few questions? Elias looked at her, his eyes usually distant, holding a flicker of surprise. He hesitated, his protective anonymity threatened, but a quiet voice within him, fueled by the music he had just unleashed, urged him forward. He simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement, a tiny crack in the carefully constructed facade of his forgotten life. Maya sensed a story of immense power, a secret symphony waiting to be unveiled. The unseen symphony of the city. The political machinations behind the Urban Revitalization Initiative gained relentless momentum. Julian Vance, with the full backing of the Grandire's influential board, was now the undisputed darling of the city's cultural elite. His arrogant dismissal of street musicians had resonated with a segment of the population that valued order and perceived refinement over the raw, authentic pulse of New Orleans. He actively campaigned for the street performance ban, portraying street artists not as creators, but as a blight, a chaotic element that diminished the city's aspirations for high culture. His pronouncements, delivered with polished eloquence and a theatrical flair, swayed public opinion and, more crucially, the city council. The pressure on Elias escalated. He felt the weight of all the other street performers, the quiet poets, and the forgotten bluesmen, whose livelihoods and very identities were threatened by Julian's crusade. Their stories, their struggles, their unwavering dedication to their craft echoed in his mind. He was no longer just fighting for his anonymous sanctuary. He was fighting for an entire community, a family of artists who painted, sang, and played their souls onto the city sidewalks. The threat was palpable, a suffocating force that reminded him of the slow, creeping despair that had once driven him into self-imposed exile. Meanwhile, Maya Sharma, her journalistic instincts fully ignited, delved into a meticulous, almost obsessive investigation into Elias. The snippet of his playing she'd recorded, the sheer, undeniable genius captured in those few seconds, fueled her relentless search. She spent countless hours in dusty archives, sifting through old music journals, sifting through obscure jazz forums and forgotten news clippings. She uncovered tantalizing fragments, whispers of the maestro, a legendary jazz pianist named Elias Thorne, who had vanished without a trace decades ago, vague mentions of a devastating hand injury, and cryptic allusions to a profound personal tragedy that had shattered his world. She pieced together tantalizing clues, connecting the maestro's signature improvisational style to the raw brilliance she had witnessed in Elias's performance. The evidence was circumstantial, a jigsaw puzzle with too many missing pieces, but her gut told her she was on the verge of uncovering something monumental. She approached Elias again, subtly, hesitantly. She met him in the quiet alley, offering him a hot coffee, her questions circling cautiously around his past. "Your music. It has a history, doesn't it?" she'd ask, her eyes gentle but probing. Elias remained guarded, his responses curt, fearful of exposing the raw wounds of his past. The anonymity was a protective shell, and breaking it, even for a cause he believed in, was terrifying. He wrestled with his internal conflict, the desire to protect his chosen family of street artists versus the profound personal cost of revealing his true identity. The looming battlefield was City Hall. The climactic vote on the street performance ban was scheduled for sunset, a time that symbolized the fading light of hope for many of the city's artists. The auditorium was packed, a crucible of public opinion. Julian Vance was there, a theatrical figure on the podium, delivering a fiery, impassioned speech. His voice boomed, echoing through the chamber, urging the council to cleanse the city's cultural landscape, to embrace true artistry, and reject the cacophony of the streets. He had powerful allies on the council, prominent figures who nodded in agreement, their votes seemingly assured. Elias, on Maya's persistent urging, had decided to attend. He sat in the back, a silent, solitary figure among the restless crowd, his wide-brimmed hat casting his face in shadow. The memories of his past glory, the roar of concert halls, the adulation of audiences swirled in his mind, juxtaposed with the pain of his injury, the chilling emptiness of his family's loss, the gnawing fear of judgment. He felt utterly alone, a single, flickering candle against a raging storm. The clock on the wall, visible to everyone, ticked relentlessly towards sunset, towards the inevitable vote. Julian's confidence was palpable, almost suffocating. He was clearly convinced of a landslide victory. Elias knew he had one last, desperate chance. He could continue to hide, to let the city's vibrant street art fade into oblivion, taking with it his last connection to music. Or he could make a statement, a final, definitive performance that might just sway the tide. He looked at Maya, her face alight with an almost desperate hope, and saw the belief she had in him. He saw the faces of the other street performers scattered throughout the room, their expressions a mixture of weary resignation and last-ditch defiance. The tremor in his right hand, a persistent reminder of his brokenness, felt heavier than ever. But beneath the fear, a resolve hardened. He had to play. He had to speak the language he knew best, the only language that could truly express the soul of the city. He had to perform. The maestro's return and a shattered illusion. The air in City Hall was thick with the weight of expectation. Julian Vance, bathed in the glow of the stage lights, had just concluded his fiery address, his voice echoing with self-satisfied pronouncements about cultural refinement and the necessary removal of urban blight. The city council members, a formidable phalanx of civic power, were already reaching for their voting buttons, their faces showing a clear inclination to pass the ban. The fate of New Orleans' vibrant street music hung by a thread, just moments from being severed. Just as the council president raised her gavel, ready to bring the vote to order, a voice, urgent and clear, cut through the hushed anticipation. "Please, just a moment." Maya Sharma, her usually calm demeanor replaced by a flash of desperate courage, rushed forward from the press section, clutching a microphone offered by a bewildered technician. "Council members, I beg you, don't let a handful of powerful voices silence the true heart of this city. Street art isn't a nuisance. It's the very soul, the rhythm, the unseen symphony that enriches our public spaces. You cannot vote to extinguish the very essence of New Orleans' unique spirit." Her impassioned plea, raw and heartfelt, was powerful, but she knew it lacked the definitive proof, the undeniable force, to truly sway the hardened council. From the back of the auditorium, a lone figure began to move. Elias Thorne. He pushed through the rows of spectators, his wide-brimmed hat still obscuring his face, but his movements now imbued with a quiet, terrifying resolve. He had witnessed Maya's bravery, her desperate attempt to fight for the dignity of his community. The weight of all the silenced melodies, all the unheard stories, coalesced within him. This was it. This was his last, desperate chance. He reached the front, stepping onto the stage, a silent, almost spectral presence. Julian Vance, still basking in the afterglow of his speech, eyed him with a mixture of annoyance and disdain. "What is this? Another one of these beggars?" Julian sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. Elias ignored him. He turned to the council president, his voice, though soft, carrying an unexpected gravity. "Madam President," he said, his voice raspy from disuse, yet resonating with an undeniable authority. May I have permission to play?" The council president, intrigued by the unexpected interruption and the quiet dignity of the man, hesitated. She exchanged a glance with her fellow council members. Curiosity won out. "Very well," she said, her voice a mix of bewilderment and grudging permission. "You have 2 minutes, but make it quick." A grand piano, a gleaming black behemoth, had been set up on the stage for Julian's earlier demonstration. Elias walked towards it, his steps slow, deliberate. He reached up, his hand trembling slightly, and removed his wide-brimmed hat. The hat fell to the floor with a soft thud, revealing his face, older, lined with the indelible marks of pain and hardship. But his eyes, now fully unveiled, burned with a fierce, almost terrifying brilliance. They were the eyes of a man who had seen too much, lost too much, and now, finally, had everything to lose. He sat at the piano, his fingers hovering over the keys. The tremor in his right hand, a constant, debilitating affliction for years, was still there, a ghost of its former self. But as he closed his eyes and took a deep, shuddering breath, focusing his entire being on the music, something miraculous happened. The tremor, for the first time in years, completely vanished. His fingers, once hesitant, now danced across the keys with an effortless virtuosity, a blur of flawless motion. He played. Not the simple street tunes, but a breathtaking, complex jazz improvisation, a furious, defiant explosion of suppressed genius. It began with a melancholic, almost sorrowful opening, a reflection of years of hidden pain, then swelled into a symphony of dizzying runs, intricate harmonies, and dazzling polyrhythms. He wove in snippets of his most legendary compositions, melodies so iconic, so unique, that they were unmistakable to any true jazz aficionado. Whispers of the Delta, Midnight Soliloquy, The City's Heartbeat. Each phrase was a living, breathing testament to his unparalleled mastery, a raw, undeniable statement of his identity. The music was not just technically brilliant, it was infused with a profound soul, a raw emotional depth that Julian Vance, in all his polished perfection, could never hope to replicate. Julian Vance watched, transfixed, from his seat. His face, initially a mask of disdain, slowly contorted into horrified recognition. His eyes, trained to dissect every note, every chord, every nuance, saw the effortless virtuosity, the profound soul in the music, the unmistakable style, the unique voice of Elias Thorne, the maestro, his childhood idol, the legendary figure whose recordings he had devoured, whose improvisations he had unconsciously emulated, but whose true depth he had never fully understood until this moment. The realization dawned on him, cold and brutal. He had spent years ridiculing a living legend, a man whose genius dwarfed his own. His arrogance shattered, replaced by utter shame, professional ruin, and a creeping, sickening sense of self-loathing. He was trembling, not with excitement, but with profound, irreversible defeat. The room, initially murmuring with curiosity and polite skepticism, had fallen into an absolute stunned silence. As Elias's music swelled, reaching a crescendo of breathtaking complexity and emotion, faces in the audience transformed, from skepticism to wonder to profound awe. Journalists frantically typed on their laptops, their fingers flying, recognizing the legendary maestro, the story of a lifetime unfolding before their eyes. The council members, hardened politicians, accustomed to manipulation and posturing, were visibly moved, their expressions shifting from stoicism to wonder, some even wiping away tears. The security guards, once prepared to escort him out, now stood rigid, mesmerized. When Elias finished, the final chord hanging in the air, the silence in City Hall held for a long, pregnant moment, stretching taut with unspoken emotion. Then, as if a dam had broken, the auditorium erupted. A thunderous, roaring, standing ovation shook the very foundations of City Hall. People cheered, cried, stomped their feet, their applause echoing through the chamber, a powerful, collective roar of vindication. His performance wasn't just a musical triumph, it was a profound act of truth, a raw, undeniable statement that silenced every critic and proved the enduring, untamable power of true artistry. The maestro had returned, and the city, in its raucous, beautiful heart, knew it. Harmony restored and legacies reclaimed. The reverberations of Elias Thorne's performance shook the city to its core. Julian Vance's carefully constructed career, built on a foundation of elitism and disdain for authentic artistry, crumbled with devastating speed. The news of his public mockery of a living legend, coupled with his zealous campaign to ban street performances, sparked an immediate and furious backlash. Concert venues across the country canceled his upcoming performances. Major record labels, wary of the public outcry, severed their ties. Music critics, who had once lauded his technical prowess, now lambasted his profound lack of soul and his shocking arrogance. Julian found himself a pariah in the very industry he had sought to dominate, facing professional ostracization and public ridicule that would follow him for years. The city council, deeply moved and thoroughly shamed by Elias's powerful performance, acted swiftly. The proposed street performance ban, once seemingly inevitable, was not just defeated, it was overwhelmingly rejected. Instead, New progressive ordinances were immediately drafted and passed, recognizing and promoting street art as a vital and irreplaceable part of New Orleans' cultural heritage. Public spaces were designated as official performance zones, and funding was allocated to support and protect street musicians. It was a victory not just for Elias, but for the very soul of the city. Elias Thorne, the maestro, was once again a celebrated figure. Offers poured in for concerts, recording deals, and prestigious teaching positions at renowned music conservatories. He accepted some, performing to sold-out crowds, his music imbued with a newfound depth and vulnerability born of his years in the shadows. He used his platform not to seek personal glory, but to champion the cause of street musicians and advocate for wider access to music education for underprivileged youth. He finally shared the full story of his devastating hand injury and the profound personal tragedy, the loss of his family in a tragic car accident that had driven him into self-imposed exile. He spoke of the guilt, the despair, and the belief that his gift was irrevocably broken. Sharing his story, allowing himself to be truly vulnerable, became a powerful act of healing for himself and for countless others who had suffered in silence. Maya Sharma, the young music journalist, found her career soaring. Her article, "The Maestro Returns: How a Street Musician Silenced Arrogance and Saved a City's Soul," became a national sensation, establishing her as a respected and insightful voice in music journalism. She became Elias's unofficial publicist, ensuring his message of compassion and the power of grassroots art reached a global audience. She was often by his side, documenting his journey, a quiet, empathetic presence who understood the profound story unfolding. One evening, after a particularly moving performance at the city's oldest jazz club, Elias sat with Maya, sipping a quiet tea. The adulation of the crowd still buzzed in the air, but his demeanor remained as humble as ever. "Maya," he said, his voice softer than the public had heard it, "I owe you a great debt. You saw something in me even when I was trying to hide it. You gave me a voice when I thought mine was lost forever." Maya smiled, a warmth in her eyes. "You gave yourself a voice, Elias. I just held up the microphone. Your music, it's a gift that needed to be shared. The city needed to hear it." He looked out the window at the bustling New Orleans street, alive with music and laughter. "I spent so long believing my injury, my sorrow, had broken me, that my music was gone. But perhaps," he mused, a faint smile touching his lips, "it was simply evolving, becoming something deeper, more honest. The streets, they taught me a different kind of truth, a truth that the concert halls sometimes forget." "And what truth is that, Maestro?" Maya asked gently. "That music isn't just about perfection," Elias replied, his gaze distant, "or grand stages. It's about connection, about soul, about finding harmony in the dissonance. And sometimes, the most profound melodies emerge from the most unexpected places." He finally felt a profound sense of peace, a quiet joy. His past was no longer a burden, but a testament to his resilience, and his renewed purpose was clearer than any composition. He was back, not just as a musician, but as a guiding light for others. The vibrant energy of New Orleans thrummed with a renewed, more profound rhythm. Elias Thorne, the maestro, now in his early 70s, was not merely a celebrated figure. He was a beloved patriarch of the city's artistic soul. His performances, often to sold-out crowds at historic venues, were deeper, more soulful than ever, each note imbued with the wisdom of a life both broken and beautifully reassembled. He poured a significant portion of his earnings not into personal luxuries, but into the very community that had offered him anonymous solace. He had established the Maestro's Melody Fund, a nonprofit organization that had transformed the lives of countless aspiring musicians. The fund provided high-quality instruments to underprivileged youth, offered scholarships for music education, and, perhaps most importantly, created safe, acoustically sound practice spaces in underserved neighborhoods. He often visited these spaces, his presence a quiet inspiration. He personally mentored young talents, his hand now steady enough to guide their fingers on the keys, his wisdom freely given. Chloe, the young singer he had once anonymously supported, was now a rising star in her own right, her soulful voice gracing stages across the city, always quick to acknowledge the maestro's silent early support. She often performed at benefit concerts for the Melody Fund, her voice a powerful echo of Elias's enduring generosity. Julian Vance, his once brilliant career utterly eclipsed, had retreated from the public eye. The shame of his arrogance, of having publicly ridiculed a living legend, had been a bitter, unavoidable reckoning. In a quiet, almost unheard act of penance, he anonymously donated a substantial sum to the maestro's Melody Fund, money earned from selling off his prized antique piano collection. Occasionally, he would volunteer, unseen by the public, at one of Elias's outreach programs, helping to set up chairs or distribute instruments, a solitary figure seeking a small, private form of redemption, a silent testament to the enduring power of true artistry over shallow ego. The story culminates on a warm, golden afternoon. Elias, wearing his iconic wide-brimmed fedora, sat not on a concert stage but at a beautifully tuned grand piano placed on a bustling street corner in the French Quarter. He wasn't playing for money. His open case contained only a small, hand-painted sign that read, "Music for the Soul." He played a spontaneous improvisation, a vibrant, joyful melody that wove together classical precision with the raw, untamed spirit of jazz. He was surrounded by a diverse crowd, tourists, locals, children dancing, street vendors tapping their feet. A few young street musicians, inspired by his journey and supported by his fund, played alongside him, their trumpets, clarinets, and guitars weaving their melodies into his, a harmonious, spontaneous symphony. Behind him, now a permanent fixture on the building wall, was a large, vibrant mural, commissioned by the city council. It depicted a symphony of musical notes, instruments, and the smiling faces of diverse artists, a permanent tribute to New Orleans' revitalized street art culture. Elias looked up, a serene smile on his face, the sun catching the silver glint of his now steady hands. He had found his ultimate stage, not in the grand concert halls, but in the open, welcoming heart of the city he loved. His music, once a source of private torment, was now a flowing river of compassion, connecting souls, inspiring generations, and ensuring that the symphony of the streets would never again be silenced. If this story stirred your heart, if it reminds you that courage can alter destinies and that light always finds a path even in the deepest darkness, please leave a comment. Share this story with those who need inspiration. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss our upcoming stories.